Well, thanks very much for that kind introduction. And I have to say, I know it's the end of a long day. I hear it was a very productive day. And I'm really grateful to the IGF USA Steering Group for both planning this event as well as George Washington University for hosting it, and also to all of you, the multi-stakeholder community who are here today, because it's your energy, your dedication, your vigilance that's really critical to ensuring that the internet remains vibrant and open. And so, we are very excited about the IGF that's going to be happening in Brazil. And over the last few years, we've seen the IGF grow in stature, in participants, in diversity, in substance, and this is a very positive development. And we want to make sure that it continues and that it continues on the trajectory that it's on. Because the IGF has really demonstrated that it is the preeminent venue for the multi-stakeholder community to share opinions, ideas, and solutions to problems regarding the range of internet governance issues. And so, we believe very strongly, and I believe personally, that the continuation of the IGF and its growth are essential to the future of the internet. Here's some statistics that I think are amazing about how the internet has grown since the IGF started. So since the first IGF 10 years ago, the number of internet users has increased from 1 billion to 3 billion. Mobile phone subscriptions have increased from 40% of the world's population in 2005 to over 90% today, and that includes over 4 billion subscriptions in developing countries. And the internet's economic benefits are increasingly being felt in the developing world. Overall, the internet economy contributes 5 to 9% to total economic growth in developed country markets. But in developing country markets, the internet economy is growing at 15 to 25% per year, which is just amazing. And so what we want to do in Brazil is to continue to demonstrate to the world that the multi-stakeholder approach that brings together government, policymakers, businesses, NGOs, internet experts, all on an equal footing, is the best way to effectively deal with the challenges that we face today. And so I am really happy to see that there's growing support and recognition among other country governments for this. And I'm sure you noticed that just a few weeks ago, the communications minister, Prasad of India, announced the government of India's support for the multi-stakeholder approach, which was a huge change in the position that India has been taking. And one of the things that he stressed, with which I wholeheartedly agree, is that multi-stakeholderism needs to embrace all geographies and all societies. And I think this is really the challenge that we have. How are we going to build out those who are participating in the IGF, that are participating with their voices and their ideas into this whole melting pot of people? And so this is essential, that every country and every citizen, regardless of where they live, can contribute to the global decision making on how we manage this common resource. And that, I think, makes the internet very unique, because it's really grassroots, just like the internet. And of course, it's not always neat. Sometimes it's messy, but we need to learn to live with that and not try to restrict it into this very narrow box. So I think one of the challenges that we have at the next IGF in Brazil is, how do we continue to find ways to encourage and enhance global participation in multi-stakeholder bodies, not just at the IGF, but in ICANN, at the International Engineering Task Force, at other kinds of bodies that are involved in the internet. And as I travel the world and talk to technologists, experts, developers, entrepreneurs, what I hear is that everybody is interested in this and they want to participate. So the challenge for us is, how do we make things accessible to them, I think, to be able to participate. And so I think this is something we all need to work together to figure out, and it's a challenge that we have. And there are ways, I think, that we can include more people. One of them is to have more of these kind of meetings, to have more regional meetings and discussions in between the IGF, so that we can ensure that there's inclusive activity and vibrant activity that's going on all along. The other thing that I think is very important is that we ensure that the IGF remains a respected and neutral convener of the international multi-stakeholder community. But, and this is, I think, going to be the challenge that we have to look at, the IGF has to do more than just convene. It can't just convene. It needs to also start being a forum where solutions to all of these thorny issues that are presented to us, like identity theft, preserving privacy, security of networks, all of these things that we are confronting every day as individuals, as governments, where some solutions can be put forward. The trick is not to mandate anything. And the trick is to keep an open discussion so that menus of solutions can be put forward. And for us at the US government, we fully support this kind of evolution of the IGF as things go forward. I also want to commend the IGF's multi-stakeholder advisory group for selecting the theme Policy Options for Connecting the Next Billion as its intersessional work at the Global IGF in Brazil. And I think it's great that the IGF USA selected this same theme, because if we want to really fulfill the Internet's promise, then we all have to redouble development efforts to expand Internet access to everyone, as Cheryl said in the introduction. And unfortunately, the benefits of economic development, access to education, medicine, information, and global markets that are fostered by the Internet aren't shared by everybody yet. And so today what you have is a situation where 3 out of every 5 people in the world remain without Internet access. And in the poorest countries, that figure can top 95%. So, sort of what do we do about that? Part of what we have to do about that is help countries to think about policy, because there's a reason why access is high in Colombia but low in Venezuela, high in Malaysia but low in North Korea, high in Kenya, low in Ethiopia. And part of it is government resources, and part of it is we need to have clear and comprehensive national broadband plans. We need to have one here, which we do, but we need to help other countries as they're thinking about this. How do plans get built out that encourage private investment, competition, remove bureaucratic obstacles, and take advantage of shared Internet services at schools, libraries, community centers, and cafes? So we in the US government have also looked at this problem, and we're looking for ways to partner with this whole community, with countries, regional development banks, network engineers, industry leaders, so that we can actually substantially increase broadband access in the developing world and simultaneously foster sound policy development so that it can keep the Internet strong, because just building it out isn't going to work if the policy isn't there to make sure that competition and vibrancy can be maintained. And so we are looking at how we can develop an initiative that's going to connect several billion people in a short amount of time in partnership with everybody sitting here. Interestingly, there was a recent report of the Alliance for an Affordable Internet, which talked about 4 critical success factors for any government that wants to extend its Internet connectivity. And they had the four things, which I think are a good basis for what we have to look at from a policy perspective, are driving broadband infrastructure expansion through increased private investment and removal of barriers, which I've already referred to. Secondly, to intensify competition and level the playing field to increase access, reduce cost, and stimulate demand. Thirdly, open access and infrastructure sharing, and fourth, to enable access to spectrum. And these are things all of you in the room, I'm sure, know in your sleep, and they seem so self-evident, but getting from where we are today to these is not always so easy, and I think that's where we really need to join forces. So I think, it is great that we have this meeting of the IGF USA that's got a diverse multi-stakeholder working group that's going to discuss and formulate what are the high-level policy options that reflect this report. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this discussion as we go into Brazil, and how do we take what you guys are figuring out here and discuss it even in a wider partnership. So just in conclusion, I would just say, the internet, which we all think about every day because all of us in this room wouldn't be here if we didn't care about it, it really offers unprecedented opportunities for economic growth in developing countries. Of the developing world's 1.4 billion extremely poor people, 70% live in rural areas. And think about how people's lives can be transformed by connecting village schools to the web, or bringing telemedicine to far-flung rural health centers, or providing accurate weather information to farmers and fishermen, and supplying up-to-date market information to producers, to farmers, etc. One of the things that I think is so amazing is that it has now been documented that for every 10% increase in a country's internet penetration, its total economic growth expands by 1 to 2%. So the internet is really something that we all need to think of as foundational for creating shared prosperity, and also to think about it as fundamental for economic growth, as important as other things that we think of as traditional infrastructure, highways, power grids, ports. And I think it's very important that we work together to get that recognition into the lexicon of those who are busy doing that kind of infrastructure development, the multilateral development banks, our respective aid organizations in all of our countries, etc. But the internet can only be an engine for inclusive growth if it's available, accessible, and affordable for everyone. And so we are going to need your help if we are going to successfully connect the rest of the world. And so I'm really looking forward over the next few months to working with you, to hearing your ideas, and to actually mobilizing action. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. We have 5 minutes for questions. So if you want to start to queue up, there's a microphone right there in the front of the room, and there's one in the back. Lunch was that good, huh?
Hi, Cheryl.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Andrew Mack from AM Global. So I wanted to pick up on something that you were just talking about. I was last week speaking at the Africa DNS Forum in Nairobi. And one of the biggest questions that came out is there are, as this equivalent of the African IGFs and other things, very business focused. They're trying to make the DNS into a real driver of economic growth, which is terrific. It's not rhetorical for them, it's very real. One of the biggest challenges that everyone faces, though, is that there is not a huge amount of knowledge of policy on the government level, on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have different policies across different jurisdictions. So even in East Africa, which is a pretty well-integrated economic area, they still have different ICT policies. They still have different policies around IP, different policies around the way that the pipe is governed, and all that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about what you see on in the future for that, and ways that we as industry can help push toward harmonization, which will, in theory, raise all boats? Thanks.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in all respects. Kenya is an amazing place in terms of just how vibrant their community is, and I think an understanding of everything that I was talking about in terms of how foundational this can be. It's not clear that recognition has spread completely throughout East Africa yet, and even in some surprising places like South Africa, where policies haven't really kept up with the pace of change. And so I think one of the things that that's very important is that we try as best we can to give a voice to those who are the entrepreneurs and developers in those communities, to sort of demonstrate, because every government wants developers, they want a sort of modern economy, they want this piece. But I think the question of how you get from wherever you are today to that place really needs to be informed by your own citizens in terms of what they need in order for it to get there. And I think there's a big divide sometimes between those who are doing and those who are making policy. And I think it's important for all of us to try to help bridge that divide and to find those voices. I also think organizing discussions like the IGF and like these regional things and really participating in those is also extremely important, as is providing technical assistance where requested on how do you develop the policy basis for this and what's the plan. So I think there's sort of a layers of approaches, and we need to address all of them simultaneously if we really want to see things move forward.
Hi, Mike Nelson with Cloudflare. Back in 1998, I wrote an article for the Aspen Institute called Sovereignty in the Network World. And I kind of explained how it seemed to me that governments were going to lose control of their networks, their content, their media. And we've seen a lot of that happen, but we're now about to go to the next phase where we're going to have drones flying over territory and low or Earth orbiting satellites. They're going to allow anybody anywhere to connect to the cloud. And it's going to be an even bigger challenge to sovereignty. So my question is, without naming names, can you tell us a little bit about the one-on-one discussions you have with your counterparts, particularly in Asia, in Russia, and in France, about the future of sovereignty? Because this is going to be it's a very different world, and governments seem to me have a very hard time understanding what the world will be like in just 5 or 10 years when their citizens really are able to just bypass a lot of the controls that define what sovereignty is.
No, I think that's right. And I think the thing that's very uncomfortable, if you think about where did all this start, it started in the telecom space, in a sense. And you think about telecom, a highly regulated place. And so you have a mindset that it is your job to control things. And then you have this internet, which is sort of the antithesis of a central control. And I think for a very long time, there was a reluctance to intervene because everybody thought this was the whiz-bang thing. Nobody kind of understood it, and they were afraid they were going to break it if they did something. I think we're in a different phase now, which is people are very nervous about how fast all of these things are growing. They're not in their control, and they want to like assert control. And I think the difficulty of that is that technology just keeps moving at an exponential pace. And governments don't move that fast. So by the time a government gets its arms around something, the next thing is there. And so I think it's really important to think about this in terms of principles and, what is it that we stand for in terms of privacy? What is it that we stand for in terms of security? And not try to micromanage the individual technology, because you'll always be catching up if you try to do that. But I think that transition is very hard when the locus of it is situated with people who are who think their job is regulating on the one hand, as well as a lot of policymakers who, because it takes a while, if you look at sort of the age divide, and I'm not trying to be ageist here, I think a lot of folks who are, over a certain age didn't grow up with the internet, so they're very uncomfortable with all of this. And you see a desire to think about it differently than you do with folks who did grow up with it. And so I think you also have that huge challenge that has to be dealt with. I don't know that there's one solution, but I think we absolutely need to think about it in a broader way, and also to understand, and this is why, in my view, the IGF is so essential, that we have to be comfortable with a certain level of chaos if we don't want to really cabin in the internet and to such an extent that we're choking it. But governments aren't comfortable with chaos. So I think, we are in a transition phase. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So I think we have time for one last question. Yeah.
My name is Ali Akbar Musavi. I'm working on ICT diffusion in countries, like so-called ICT-averse countries like Iran, Sudan, North Korea, and so on. You talked about affordable access internet, affordable internet. I have two obstacles in that regard. In such a country, I'm just talking about these kind of countries. One is sanctions. You still have sanction on for North Korean people. 20 million, I don't know how many people of Korean people cannot buy or get access officially from U.S. Companies. You have this license for Iranians, general licenses that you issued recently for Sudanese also, but the companies are not implemented these kind of licenses. So people in these countries cannot officially get access to these items. This is a big obstacle that I think State Department and the administration can resolve it very easily, but I don't know why they didn't work on that. And the second issue is that why the State Department and USAID doesn't work on, spend and invest on the internet, expanding internet, affordable access to internet in such a countries, in rural areas, in villages that can be partnered with other countries like China or many countries that, or private sectors that can be partner of the US aid, for example, and expand internet in these countries. For example, in Iran, you have right now a good environment, better environment than 2 days ago, even after this agreement. I think this is my question. Thank you.
Well, I guess what I would say is I think that there's always other foreign policy issues besides just open internet access that we have to deal with, and these are tough issues that we confront with respect to the countries that you named, and the judgment of many, many successive administrations, as well as with respect to some of these countries, pretty much the entire UN, is that it is appropriate to have sanctions on these countries. And so the internet is a piece of that larger structure, and I think we can't just sort of take that out and say it's completely different somehow from every other kind of commerce that goes on. In terms of building out the internet in rural areas writ large, not with countries with whom we have economic sanctions, that is exactly what we want to do. We want to find a way as a government to help catalyze build out to those who don't have internet in the developing world. And so that's why we're asking for, ideas, partnership, et cetera, both of other countries as well as other companies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kathy, to put you on the spot, will your comments be available? Because something we could link to, because they were so pragmatic and they made so much sense. I would love to know if we could put a link up on. Great.
Absolutely.
Really
although I did not read them, but my
we
written remarks are absolutely available, and we'll put them up on the web. So
great. Once that's available, we will link to that on the IGF USA. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.